They were laughing in my living room while my wife cried alone upstairs. My son Brandon, his wife Sophia, and her parents were standing in the home I designed and built 30 years ago, snapping photos, measuring walls, and discussing how quickly they could sell it. They spoke about me like I was already gone, like I was nothing. What they didn't know was that the quiet old architect they were discarding had already drawn his final blueprint, one designed to demolish their entire world. Thank you for being here with me. Before we go any further, take a second and tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. Also, a quick note. Some details in this story are dramatized to better convey the lesson. Any resemblance to real names or situations is unintentional, but the meaning remains absolutely true. The flight from Seattle had landed 40 minutes early. Some kind of tailwind over Oregon, the pilot said. I took it as a sign. At 70 years old, you learn to read the small gifts life hands you. I had been away for 4 days at an architecture preservation conference, and the only thing on my mind was Maggie, my wife, my quiet, book-loving, garden-tending wife of 43 years. I had bought her an orchid at Pike Place Market that morning, a white phalaenopsis with a single purple vein running through each petal. She had been talking about wanting one for months, pointing at them through the window of the flower shop on Irving Street every time we walked past. I cradled it in my lap the entire flight home, protecting it like it was made of glass. The cab dropped me off at 742 Kirkham Street. Our house. The house I had designed myself in 1993, back when the Sunset District was still affordable, and the fog rolled in so thick you could taste the salt. I had drawn every line of that house. I knew every beam, every joint, every angle of light that came through the kitchen window at 4 in the afternoon. It was not just a structure. It was my autobiography, written in wood and concrete and glass. The front door was unlocked. That was the first wrong thing. Maggie always locked the door when I was away. Always. 43 years of marriage, and she had never once left it unlocked at night. I stepped inside, the orchid in one hand, my carry-on rolling behind me with the other. The house smelled wrong. Expensive cologne, sharp and aggressive, something with oud and leather that did not belong here. Our home smelled like Maggie's jasmine tea, like the old paper of her books, like the lemon oil she used on the banisters. This was an invasion. I heard it then. Laughter. Coming from downstairs, from the open-plan living room that connected to the kitchen. It was loud, confident, proprietary laughter. The kind of laughter people make in a space they believe belongs to them, but above it, barely audible, another sound. A soft, broken, hitching breath. Coming from upstairs. From the reading room. I left my bag by the door. I set the orchid carefully on the hallway table, and I climbed the stairs, my hand gripping the banister I had carved myself from a single piece of reclaimed redwood. The reading room door was half open. The lamp beside her armchair cast a warm amber circle in the otherwise dark room. And there was Maggie, curled into the old wingback chair, her knees drawn up, her face buried in the quilt her mother had made 50 years ago. Her shoulders shook in small, silent convulsions. She was crying the way people cry when they have been crying for a long time and have no more energy to make sound. Maggie. I said her name softly, not wanting to scare her. Honey, I am home. She jumped. Her head snapped up and her red, swollen eyes went wide with something that looked almost like terror. Walter. Her voice cracked. You are not supposed to be back until tomorrow. I crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt beside her chair. My knees protested, but I did not care. I took her cold hands in mine. They were trembling. What happened? I asked. Tell me what happened. Who made you cry? She shook her head, her lips pressing together, as if she were physically trying to hold the words inside. They are here, she whispered. Downstairs. They have been here for 2 hours. Who is here, Maggie? Brandon. Her voice broke on our son's name. And Sophia. And her parents. The Harringtons. They just showed up. They did not call. They just came in and started. Started what? But I did not need her to answer. Because at that exact moment, A voice floated up the stairs. A woman's voice, sharp and bright and utterly pleased with itself. It was Patricia Harrington, my son's mother-in-law. "Oh, Douglas, look at this crown molding. It is original, is it not? That will add at least 50,000 to the listing price. Make sure you photograph it." Listing price. The two words hit me like a physical blow. I stood up slowly. I looked at Maggie. She would not meet my eyes. I looked at the bookshelf beside her chair, the one I had built into the wall when we moved in, the one that held her collection of first edition mysteries, arranged alphabetically, spines aligned perfectly. It was crooked, tilted slightly to the left. Someone had bumped into it. Someone who did not care. I squeezed Maggie's hand once. "Stay here," I said. My voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes right before something breaks. I walked out of the reading room. I walked down the stairs, my hand trailing along the banister, feeling every groove I had carved 3 decades ago. The laughter got louder with every step. They were comfortable. They were happy. They were celebrating something. I reached the bottom of the stairs. The hallway opened into the living room. I could see them now, through the wide archway. All 4 of them. In my home. In the house I had built with my own hands. I stopped in the doorway. I did not speak. I just stood there and watched. And there they were. All of them. Arranged in my living room like actors on a stage who had forgotten the audience was watching. Douglas Harrington stood by the bay window, his phone held up at arm's length, photographing the built-in shelving I had designed to follow the curve of the wall. He wore a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and he moved through my home with the proprietary ease of a man inspecting property he already owned. His wife, Patricia, was by the fireplace, speaking into her phone in that clipped, performative voice. "Yes, Carolyn," she said, running manicured fingers along the mantelpiece. "Original 1990s construction, but excellent bones. The lot alone is worth 2.8. We are thinking 3.2 with the structure. Yes, I will send photos tonight." Sophia, my daughter-in-law, sat at my dining table with a leather portfolio open, writing in quick, sharp strokes, listing comparable properties, doing market research. In my dining room, on my table, and Brandon, my 37-year-old son, stood in the center of the room holding one end of a retractable measuring tape hooked to the kitchen doorframe. He was measuring the span of my living room, the room where he had taken his first steps. He looked up and saw me. The tape measure snapped back with a sharp metallic crack that made everyone freeze. "Dad." His face went white. "Dad, you are not supposed to be home until tomorrow." "I live here," I said. My voice was quiet. Dangerously quiet. "Someone want to explain why my wife is crying upstairs while you people are measuring my house and calling realtors?" Douglas recovered first. He slid his phone into his pocket and smiled that wide, false country club smile. "Walter, you are back early. Wonderful. We were hoping to discuss this in a more structured setting, but since you are here," Patricia stepped forward, chin tilted upward. "Walter, darling, do not be dramatic. Nobody is selling anything without permission. We are simply doing a preliminary assessment. Brandon asked us to help evaluate the property's potential." I turned to my son. "Brandon, look at me." He raised his eyes. And there it was. Not guilt. Resignation. The look of a man who had already made his decision and was simply waiting for the storm to pass. "Dad," he said, "just hear me out. This house is too much for you and Mom. It is a 4-bedroom home for 2 people. The maintenance, the property taxes. You are 70 years old. Mom has her heart condition. What happens if something goes wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," I said. "Your mother and I are fine." Sophia stood up from the table. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. "Dad, we are trying to help. The market is incredible right now. 3.2 million minimum. You and Mom could find a lovely condo downtown, and the rest could go toward the family, toward everyone's future." Douglas stepped in, his voice low and reasonable. "Walter, Let us be practical men. You understand value. This property is an underutilized asset. You and Margaret are rattling around in here. Meanwhile, Brandon and Sophia need capital to invest. It is simply a reallocation of family resources. Family resources, I repeated. Think of it as a legacy decision, Douglas said. You are not losing a house. You are securing your family's financial future. I looked at my son. His knuckles were white around the measuring tape. Brandon, I said, is this what you want? His eyes flicked to Sophia. She gave him the smallest nod, almost imperceptible. Dad, he said, it is time. You know it is. This is the right move. For everyone. It is time. 3 words delivered with the careful neutrality of a man who had been coached, who had chosen his wife's family over his own, and was now standing in my living room measuring the walls of my life, waiting for me to step aside and disappear. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not break. Shift. Like a load-bearing wall that has been quietly absorbing pressure for years, finally reaching its tolerance threshold. Not cracking, but knowing with absolute structural certainty that the next impact would bring the whole thing down. Get out, I said. The room went still. Excuse me, Sophia said, her smile tightening. I said, get out. All of you. Out of my house. Now. Douglas opened his mouth. Walter, let us not be. Now. I did not raise my voice. 40 years of designing structures that could withstand earthquakes had taught me that true strength is not loud. It is immovable. They left. Sophia first, heels clicking sharp against my hardwood floors. Brandon behind her, head down, the measuring tape still clutched in his hand. Douglas and Patricia last, Patricia muttering something about emotional instability. The door closed. The house went silent. That deep, ringing silence that follows an explosion. I stood alone in my living room. I looked at the marks on my floor where they had dragged furniture. I looked at the scuff on the wall where Douglas had leaned. I looked at the moisture ring on my dining table where Sophia had set a glass without a coaster. Then I walked upstairs, back to the reading room. Maggie was exactly where I had left her, still clutching her mother's quilt, but she was not crying anymore. She was watching the doorway, waiting for me. I looked at her. I looked at the bookshelf beside her chair. Crooked, tilted to the left. Her books shifted out of alignment. Someone had bumped it carelessly. Someone who saw this room not as her sanctuary, but as square footage. I knew what I had to do. I had known for years, the way an architect knows which wall holds the weight, and which is just decoration. I had built contingencies into my life, the same way I built them into my buildings. Redundancies, fail-safes, emergency exits that no one else knew existed. And tonight, for the first time in 25 years, I was going to use them. I did not call a taxi. I did not call a friend. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number that Maggie had never seen me use. A number saved under a name she would not recognize. The line picked up on the second ring. Good evening, Mr. Chen. How may I assist you tonight? I need a car, I said. 742 Kirkham Street. Immediately. Of course, sir. Your usual driver is available. Estimated arrival 4 minutes. I hung up. Maggie was still in the reading room, watching me with those red-rimmed eyes that held 1,000 questions she was afraid to ask. I went to the hallway closet and pulled out her good coat, the charcoal wool one she saved for special occasions. I walked back and held it open for her. Put this on, Maggie. We are leaving. Leaving? She looked at me like I had lost my mind. Walter, it is almost 8 o'clock. Where are we going? What is happening? I need you to trust me, I said. Can you do that? She looked at the coat. She looked at me. And then, just as she had done 43 years ago when I asked her to marry a struggling architect with nothing but blueprints and ambition, she stood up and slid her arms into the sleeves. She had always trusted me, even when I did not deserve it. The car arrived in 3 minutes. A black Mercedes sedan, spotless, idling at the curb, with its headlights cutting soft circles into the fog. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door without a word. He was a young man in a dark suit, and he nodded at me with the kind of quiet deference that comes from long practice. Maggie froze on the front steps. She looked at the car, then at me. "Walter," she whispered, "what is this? Since when do you have a car service?" "Get in, honey. I will explain everything. I promise." She got in. I followed. The door closed, and the fog-dampened sounds of Kirkham Street vanished, replaced by the soft hum of leather and climate control. The driver pulled away from the curb without asking for an address. He already knew where to go. Maggie did not speak during the drive. She sat beside me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the passing streetlights. I watched her reflection in the window. The tear tracks on her cheeks had dried, but new confusion was taking root in their place. She was afraid, not of me, of whatever was coming, of whatever truth was about to upend the quiet, simple life she thought we shared. The car climbed out of the Sunset District, up through the avenues, past the park, and into the city proper. When it turned onto Nob Hill and pulled beneath the illuminated portico of the Fairmont San Francisco, Maggie let out a small sound, half gasp, half whisper. "Walter, we cannot. This place, this is." The driver opened her door. The doorman stepped forward immediately, his posture shifting from professional to personal the moment he saw me. "Mr. Chen," he said, smiling. "A pleasure, sir. It has been a few months. Shall I alert the front desk?" "Please," I said. "We will need the suite." "Of course, sir." Right away. Maggie grabbed my arm. Her fingers dug into my coat sleeve. She was staring at the doorman, then at me, then back at the gleaming marble lobby visible through the glass doors. "Walter." Her voice was barely audible. "They know you." "How do they know you?" I took her hand and guided her inside. The lobby was warm, golden, hushed. Our shoes clicked across the polished floor. The night manager appeared from behind the desk and walked toward us with his hand extended. "Mr. Chen, wonderful to see you again. Your suite is being prepared now. Shall I send up your usual tea service?" "Yes," I said. "Thank you, James. And please, could you also send up a light meal? We have not eaten." "Absolutely, sir. I will have it arranged within 20 minutes." We rode the elevator in silence. Maggie stood against the far wall, arms crossed, watching me as though I were a stranger wearing her husband's face. The doors opened onto the top floor. I led her down the hushed hallway to the suite at the end. The room was larger than the entire ground floor of our house. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around two walls, and the city spread below us like a scattered constellation. The Bay Bridge stretched across the dark water, its cables lit up in white, and beyond it, the hills of Oakland glimmered faintly in the distance. Maggie walked to the center of the room and stopped. She touched the arm of a silk-upholstered chair. She ran her fingers along the smooth marble of a side table. She was testing reality, making sure it was solid. "Walter," she said. Her voice was shaking now, and I could hear the edge of something close to panic. "I am scared. What is this place? How do they know you here? How do you have a car service and a suite at the Fairmont?" "We budget for groceries, Walter. We drive a 12-year-old Honda. You clip coupons. You told me your pension was tight. You told me." She stopped. Her face was crumbling, not with sadness this time, with something worse. The dawning suspicion that the man she had loved for 43 years might be someone she had never actually known. I took off my coat. I hung it carefully on the back of a chair. I guided her to the sofa by the windows and sat her down. I sat across from her, close enough to take her hands, which I did. They were ice-cold and trembling. "Maggie," I said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I am about to tell you, I should have told you a long time ago. And I am sorry. I am deeply, deeply sorry that I did not." She stared at me, waiting. "I have not been honest with you," I said. "Not for 25 years. And tonight, you are going to hear everything. Every single thing I have hidden. But first, I need to make one phone call. The most important phone call of our lives." She did not pull her hands away. She did not speak. She just looked at me with those wide, frightened, beautiful eyes that I had fallen in love with 4 decades ago. And she waited. Because she was Maggie. Because she had always waited for me. Even when I did not deserve it. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. The anger from Kirkham Street had burned through me and left behind something colder, something precise. I dialed a number I knew by heart. A number saved under HZ in my contacts. It rang once. Twice. Helen Zhao speaking. Helen, it is Walter Chen. A pause. Then her voice sharpened, the way a blade turns when it catches the light. Walter, it is almost 9 at night. Is it happening? It happened, I said. Tonight. They were in the house. They were measuring the walls, Helen. They were calling realtors while my wife sat alone crying upstairs. A long exhale on the other end. I am so sorry, Walter. Are you safe? Where are you? The Fairmont. Maggie is with me. She does not know anything yet. I am about to tell her everything. Good, Helen said. It is time. Call me back after. We will need to move quickly. I have been preparing for this, Walter. Everything is ready. I know it is, I said. Thank you, Helen. I hung up. Maggie was watching me. Her eyes had not left my face since I sat down. She had heard every word. Her lips parted. Who is Helen? She asked. Her voice was small but steady. And what do you mean? I do not know anything. Walter, what is happening? I leaned forward. I took her hands again. They were warmer now, but still trembling. Maggie, I began. Do you remember when I retired? When I closed the firm in 2001? She nodded slowly. Of course, you said the market was changing. You said you wanted to spend more time at home. With me. That was true, I said. I did want to spend more time with you. But that is not the whole story. When I closed the firm, I did not just retire. I sold something. Sold what? I took a breath. For 25 years, this secret had lived inside me like a sealed room. A room I had built and locked and never opened. Tonight, I was handing her the key. My seismic-resistant structural design patents, I said. The ones I developed over 15 years. The interlocking foundation system that could withstand an 8.2 earthquake. A Japanese construction conglomerate approached me in 2000. They wanted exclusive global rights. Maggie blinked. I remember the Japanese men, she said slowly. They came to the office. You took them to dinner. You said it was just a consultation. It was not a consultation, Maggie. It was a sale. They paid me $18 million. The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water. Maggie's face did not move. She stared at me as though I had spoken in a language she did not understand. 18. She whispered. Million. After taxes. I put the majority into a blind trust. I continued. I called it the Chen Family Trust. Helen Zhao is the attorney who manages it. Over the past 25 years, with reinvestment and property acquisitions, the trust has grown. As of last month, its total value is approximately $31 million. Maggie pulled her hands from mine. She stood up from the sofa. She walked 3 steps away, then turned back. Her face was white. Not with joy, not with wonder, with something that looked terrifyingly like grief. 25 years, she said. Her voice cracked on the number. You kept this from me for 25 years. Our budget spreadsheets. The Honda. The coupons. When I cried because we could not afford to visit my sister in Portland for Christmas. When Brandon needed braces and you told me we had to wait 6 months. All of that. All of it was a lie? I stood. Maggie, why? She demanded. One word. But it carried the weight of 2.5 decades of small sacrifices she had made believing they were necessary. Because of Brandon, I said. She went still. I had watched what happened to my partner's children, I continued. Edward's kids. They inherited his firm at 25. Within 3 years, one was in rehab. The other had gambled away half the estate. Money without foundation, Maggie. It destroys people. It makes them weak. It makes them believe they are owed something simply for existing. So you played poor, she said. The same words, the same accusation, but her voice was softer now. She was beginning to understand. I lived simply. I corrected her. I wanted Brandon to work, to earn, to understand what it means to build something from nothing. Everything he needed, the trust provided invisibly. His Berkeley tuition, the down payment on his first condo. I told him it was the last of our savings. I told him it was a sacrifice. I walked to the window. The city glittered below us, indifferent, beautiful. I thought I was teaching him value, I said. I thought if I kept the money invisible, he would grow into the kind of man who did not need it. A man who could stand on his own. I turned to face her. I was wrong, Maggie. I did not teach him value. I taught him that I was weak. I taught him that I was simple, that I had nothing worth protecting. And tonight, he proved that he believed every single word of that lie. Maggie sat down again, slowly, processing, reshaping 43 years of memories through this new lens. The house, she finally said. The house they want to sell. I nodded. That is the most important part. The house does not belong to us personally, Maggie. It never has. It belongs to the Chen Family Trust. We are its lifelong tenants. Brandon and his in-laws just tried to sell a property that belongs to my trust. They tried to evict the landlord. She looked at me. And for the first time since I had walked through the door tonight, something new appeared in her eyes. Not fear, not confusion. A spark. Small, hot, and deeply dangerous. And the conservatorship, she said quietly. I froze. How do you know about that? I do not, she said. But Helen said everything is ready. You said they were in the house measuring walls. That is Plan B, Walter. Which means there was a Plan A. And a conservatorship is exactly the kind of thing Douglas Harrington would try first. I stared at my wife. 43 years, and she could still surprise me. She was right. 2 months ago, Brandon and Douglas had walked into Pacific National Bank and attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent. They had filed paperwork. They had brought a lawyer. They had tried to seize control of the trust by arguing that my simple lifestyle was evidence of cognitive decline. The bank had laughed them out. And then the bank had called Helen. And Helen had called me. They filed 2 months ago, I confirmed. Helen has everything documented. The bank footage, the paperwork, the testimony. Maggie's jaw tightened. Her hands, which had been trembling all evening, went perfectly still. Good, she said. Her voice was ice. Then they already lost. They just do not know it yet. I looked at her. My quiet, book-loving wife. The woman who grew jasmine in window boxes and alphabetized her mystery novels. The woman they had dismissed. The woman they had made cry. She was not crying anymore. I picked up my phone. Let me call Helen back, I said. We have a trap to build. And like every good building, it starts with the foundation. The next morning, Maggie and I took the elevator to the 38th floor of the Salesforce Tower. She had slept very little. I could see it in the shadows beneath her eyes, in the way she gripped her purse strap like a lifeline. But she was not the woman who had been crying in her reading room last night. That woman was gone. In her place was someone harder. Someone who had been lied to by her husband for 25 years and betrayed by her son in a single evening, and had decided that grief was a luxury she could no longer afford. The elevator doors opened onto Helen Zhao's office. It was not what people expected from a trust attorney. There were no leather-bound books, no oil paintings, no warm wood paneling. Helen's office looked like a command center. Glass walls, steel furniture. 3 large monitors mounted on the far wall, currently dark. A long conference table with nothing on it, except a single thick folder and a laptop. Helen stood as we entered. She was a small woman, barely 5'3", but she occupied space the way a scalpel occupies a surgical tray. Everything about her was precise. Her black suit was cut without a single unnecessary line. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painted on. Her handshake, when she took Maggie's hand, was firm and brief. "Margaret," she said, "I am Helen Zhao. I have been managing your husband's trust for 23 years. I am sorry we are meeting under these circumstances, but I am glad you are finally here." Maggie nodded. She was taking it in. The office. The view. The city spread below us like a circuit board. This was the other side of her husband's life. The side she had never been allowed to see. "Please sit," Helen said, gesturing to the conference table. "We have a great deal to cover, and very little time." We sat. Helen opened the laptop, and the 3 wall monitors flickered to life simultaneously. On the center screen, a document appeared. It was titled in bold red letters, "Financial Profile. Coleman, Brandon, and Sophia." I felt Maggie tense beside me. "Let us start with the reason they came to your house last night," Helen said, her voice clinical. She clicked a key and the screen filled with numbers. Credit card statements, loan applications, bank notices. "Your son Brandon and his wife Sophia are in catastrophic debt. Their combined liabilities as of this morning total $912,000. Maggie made a small sound. "That is impossible," she said. "Brandon has a good job. He is a marketing director. He makes $140,000 a year before taxes," Helen interrupted gently, "which is a respectable income. The problem is not his salary. The problem is what happened to his savings." Helen clicked to the next slide. A website appeared. Sleek, professional, covered in blockchain graphics and promises of revolutionary returns. The header read, "Pacific Ledger Digital Asset Fund." 6 months ago, Helen continued, Brandon invested $900,000 into this cryptocurrency fund. Every penny of his and Sophia's savings, their retirement, their emergency fund, even a personal loan of $200,000 secured against their condo. "My God," I whispered. "The fund collapsed 8 weeks later," Helen said. "Total loss. Brandon lost everything." Maggie's hand found mine under the table. She squeezed. Hard. "But why?" she said. "Brandon is not stupid. Why would he put everything into one investment?" Helen paused. She looked at me. I nodded. "Tell her," I said. Helen clicked again. A new document appeared on the screen. Corporate filings for Pacific Ledger Digital Asset Fund. And there, listed as founding director and majority stakeholder, was a name we both knew. Douglas Harrington, Maggie read aloud. Her voice was flat, disbelieving. "Pacific Ledger was not a legitimate investment fund," Helen said. "It was a fabrication. Created by Douglas Harrington approximately 14 months ago, he recruited investors, primarily through personal connections and family channels. He collected approximately $11 million in total deposits." She clicked again. "Bank records, wire transfers, timestamps. 3 days before the fund's supposed collapse, Douglas Harrington withdrew $2.1 million from the fund's operating account and transferred it to an offshore entity in the Cayman Islands. The collapse was not a market event. It was manufactured. Douglas took the money and burned the rest." The room was very quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. I could hear Maggie breathing. "He stole from Brandon," Maggie said slowly. "His own son-in-law. His daughter's husband." "He used Brandon," Helen corrected. "Douglas needed investors to make the fund appear legitimate. Brandon was not just a victim. He was a prop, a family member whose participation would encourage others to invest. And it worked. 7 other families invested based on Brandon's involvement." I closed my eyes. My son, used as bait by his own father-in-law, bled dry of everything he had. And then, when the money was gone and the debts closed in, Brandon had done the only thing he could think of. He had come for us, for our house, for what he believed was the only asset left. "It does not excuse what he did," Helen said, reading my silence. "He still conspired to take your home. He still filed for conservatorship. He still chose to victimize you rather than ask for help. But you should understand the full picture. And Sophia, I asked. Did she know? Helen's jaw tightened. Sophia Harrington connected Brandon to her father's fund. She facilitated the introduction. She encouraged the investment. Whether she knew it was fraudulent is something my investigators are still determining. But at minimum, she was the pipeline. I looked at the screen, at the numbers, at the architecture of this fraud, because that is what it was. Architecture. Douglas had designed this scheme the way I design buildings. Foundation, framing, facade. It was elegant. It was ruthless. And my son had walked right into it, trusting the blueprint because it was drawn by family. Helen turned off the monitors. She folded her hands on the table and looked at both of us. So now you understand, she said. What happened in your house last night was not greed. It was desperation. They are drowning. And they tried to use you as a life raft. The question now is what we do about it. She opened the thick folder that had been sitting on the table. Inside was a document. 50 pages, precisely formatted, bound with a black clip. This, Helen said, is the trap. And it is the most beautiful piece of legal architecture I have ever constructed. Helen spread the document across the table. 50 pages of dense, meticulous legal language. But as I scanned the cover sheet, the title was deceptively simple. Family Estate Planning and Care Agreement. It looks like a transfer document, I said. That is exactly what it is supposed to look like, Helen replied. To anyone who does not read carefully, and I am betting everything that they will not read carefully, this appears to be a standard property transfer agreement. It states that you and Margaret, in your declining capacity, are willingly signing over the deed of 742 Kirkham Street to Brandon and Sophia Chen. Maggie stiffened. You want us to pretend to give them the house? I want them to think you are giving them the house, Helen said. But here is the architecture of it, Walter. She looked at me with something close to admiration. You will appreciate this. She flipped to page 4. Clause 6 requires the recipients, Brandon and Sophia, to formally acknowledge in writing that they believe you and Margaret are suffering from diminished mental capacity and are unable to manage your own affairs. It frames this as a protective measure. They will read it as confirmation of what they already believe, that you are old, confused, and giving up. She flipped to page 12. Clause 14 requires witnesses. Specifically, it asks that any family members present attest to the founder's state of mind. Douglas and Patricia will sign this page. They will be confirming, under oath and notarization, that they personally observed and believe you to be mentally incompetent. I see it, I said. The structure was elegant, beautiful even. They sign what they think is a victory document. But what they are actually signing is a confession, Helen finished. A legally binding, notarized witness confession that they conspired to declare you incompetent in order to seize control of your assets, combined with the conservatorship paperwork they filed 2 months ago. This document creates an airtight evidentiary chain for felony elder fraud. Maggie leaned forward. And the house? They cannot actually take it, right? Because it belongs to the trust? Exactly, Helen said. The transfer clause is void on its face. You cannot transfer property you do not personally own. The house belongs to the Chen family trust. Always has. The moment they sign this document, they gain nothing. But they lose everything. Helen closed the folder and turned to her laptop. But Walter, Margaret, I need you to understand the full scope of what we are dealing with. This is not just about your son's desperation. She typed a command, and the monitors relit. New documents appeared. IRS, letterhead. Federal investigation notices. Court filings, stamped confidential. Douglas Harrington, Helen said, has been under active federal investigation for the past 10 months. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division has been building a case against him for systematic tax evasion spanning the last decade. Unreported offshore accounts in the Caymans, Luxembourg, and Singapore. Estimated hidden assets of $4.7 million. I stared at the screen. $4.7 million hidden from the IRS. And yet this man had stood in my living room last night and called my home an underutilized asset. The hypocrisy was architectural in its scale. It gets worse, Helen continued. Patricia Harrington has been liquidating the family's domestic assets for the past 6 months. Their home in Pacific Heights sold quietly to a private buyer. Their vacation property in Tahoe gone. 3 vehicles liquidated. She has been converting everything to cash to shield it from the coming federal seizure. So they are broke, Maggie said. They are about to be indicted, Helen corrected. Douglas is looking at 15 to 20 years for tax evasion and wire fraud. Add the Pacific Ledger scheme, that is another layer of criminal liability. Crypto fraud, securities violations, wire fraud across state lines. The man is a house of cards, Margaret, and he is about to collapse. And my son married into this, I said. Your son was used by this, Helen said. But yes, he also chose to participate in the conservatorship filing. He chose to come to your house last night with a measuring tape. He is not innocent, Walter. He is simply not the architect of this scheme. Douglas is. She turned off the monitors and faced us both. Here is what I need from you. Tomorrow afternoon, I need you to call Brandon. I need you to sound old. I need you to sound defeated. I need you to tell him that you have thought about it all night, and he was right. You want to sign the house over. You want it done properly, with a lawyer present. Invite them all. Brandon, Sophia, and her parents. I need every single one of them in this room with a pen in their hand. I looked at Maggie. Her face was hard. Set. The woman who had alphabetized her mystery novels with such gentle precision now looked like she could alphabetize a list of criminal charges without flinching. They made me cry in my own reading room, she said quietly. They bumped my bookshelf. They called our home a teardown. Her eyes met mine. I am ready, Walter. I have never been more ready for anything in my life. I reached across the table and took her hand. For the first time in 25 years, there were no secrets between us. No sealed rooms. No hidden blueprints. We were finally standing on the same foundation. I looked at Helen. She was watching us with the faintest trace of a smile. Then we build, I said. And like every good structure, we start from the ground up. We give them exactly what they expect to see. A tired old couple surrendering. And by the time they realize what they have actually signed, the walls will have already come down around them. Helen nodded. I will have everything prepared by tomorrow morning. Get some rest tonight. Both of you. Tomorrow, you perform. We stood to leave. At the door, Maggie paused. She turned back to Helen. Helen, she said. One question. When this is over, when they have signed, what happens to Brandon? Helen's face softened, just barely. That depends entirely on your husband, Margaret. The cornerstone clause is absolute. Once triggered, the disinheritance is permanent. But the criminal charges, those are Walter's choice. He can file, or he can offer mercy. That decision has not been made yet. Maggie looked at me. I could see the war in her eyes. The mother fighting the woman who had been betrayed. She did not ask me to be merciful. She did not ask me to be cruel. She simply looked at me, and I understood. We would cross that bridge when we reached it. First, we had a building to demolish. I woke before dawn. The suite was dark, except for the faint orange glow of the city seeping through the curtains. Maggie was still asleep beside me, her breathing shallow and uneven. Even in sleep, she could not fully rest. Too much had changed. Too much truth had flooded into the space between us. I slipped out of bed and stood by the window. San Francisco was waking up below me. Delivery trucks crawling through empty streets. The first joggers appearing along the Embarcadero. The bay was a dark mirror, reflecting the last of the stars before the morning fog rolled in to swallow them. I had one job today, one performance, and it had to be perfect. I went to my carry-on bag and pulled out the clothes I had worn home from Seattle 2 days ago. The old khaki trousers with the faded crease, the plaid flannel shirt that Maggie had patched at the elbow 3 years ago, my worn leather belt, my scuffed walking shoes. I put them on and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. The man looking back at me was exactly what they expected. A 70-year-old retired nobody. Tired. Simple. Defeated. I practiced letting my shoulders drop. I practiced the slight tremor in my hands. I practiced the voice. Brandon, I said to my reflection, letting the word waver. Son, your mother and I have been talking. I tried it again. Softer. More broken. Maybe you were right. Maybe it is time. Good. Convincing. The voice of a man who had been awake all night, wrestling with his pride and finally losing. I had spent 40 years in rooms with engineers and investors and city planners, reading people, adjusting my pitch, knowing exactly when to push and when to yield. This was no different. This was just another negotiation. The last one? At 7:15, I picked up my phone. Maggie was awake now, sitting up in bed, watching me with wide, alert eyes. She did not speak. She just nodded once. A small, firm gesture that said, "Do it." I dialed Brandon's number. It rang 4 times. He was probably staring at the screen, debating whether to answer, whether I was calling to yell, whether I was calling to disown him. He answered on the 5th ring. Dad, his voice was cautious. Tight. Expecting a blow. I let a long breath escape me. The kind of breath a man releases when he has given up fighting. Brandon, I said. Son. Dad, are you okay? Where are you? Mom, is she? Your mother is with me, I said. We are fine. We are at a lawyer's office. A small one. For estate planning. Silence on the other end. I could practically hear his brain working, processing, calculating. A lawyer's office, he repeated carefully. Brandon, I said, and I let my voice crack. I let it splinter like dry wood. I stayed up all night. Your mother and I both. We talked and talked and I kept thinking about what you said, about how this house is too much, about how you and Sophia could use the capital, about how maybe it is time for us to let go. Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear breathing that was not his. Sophia was listening. Of course she was. They were probably in bed together. The phone on speaker between them. Their eyes locked in that predatory excitement of people who sense victory. Dad, Brandon said, and the relief in his voice was obscene. That is really wise. Really brave of you. I am so proud of you for seeing this clearly. Proud of me. My son was proud of me for surrendering. I have a lawyer, I continued. Her name is Helen Zhao. She has a small practice downtown. Handles estate matters. She says she can draw up papers today. A simple transfer. Clean and legal. Today? Brandon's voice pitched higher. You mean you want to do this today? I do not want to drag this out, son. I am tired. Your mother is tired. Let us just get it done. Can you come this afternoon? 3 o'clock? Yes, he said immediately. Absolutely. 3 o'clock. We will be there. Bring Sophia, I said, and I paused as though the next words were difficult. And bring her parents. The Harringtons. They seem to have strong opinions about our home. If this is going to be a family decision, then everyone should be present. Everyone should witness it. Of course, Dad. Of course. They will be thrilled. I mean, they will be glad to support you through this. Good, I said. Helen's office is in the Salesforce Tower. 38th floor. Suite 3812. 3 o'clock sharp. Got it. Dad, I just want you to know. You are doing the right thing. We are going to take such good care of you and Mom. You will not regret this. I know, son, I said. I know you will. I hung up. I stood perfectly still for 5 seconds. Then I straightened my spine. I pulled my shoulders back. I unclenched my jaw. The trembling in my hands stopped as though I had flipped a switch. Maggie was staring at me from the bed. Her hand was pressed over her mouth. That was terrifying, Walter, she whispered. You sounded so broken. So old. I sounded like what they wanted me to be, I said. That is the last time I will ever sound like that. I walked to the closet where I had hung the suit the hotel concierge had delivered last night per my request. A three-piece charcoal gray Tom Ford, Italian wool, custom fitted from measurements they had kept on file for years. I had never worn it in front of Maggie. I had never worn it in front of anyone in my family. I put it on. The jacket settled over my shoulders like armor. I adjusted the cuffs. I knotted the silk tie. When I turned around, Maggie was standing by the bed, her eyes wide. I have never seen you in anything like that, she said softly. I have never needed you to, I replied. Until today. She was quiet for a moment. Then she walked to her own small suitcase and pulled out a dress. Not the muted earth tones she usually wore. This one was red. Deep, bold, arterial red. A dress I had not seen in years. A dress from a version of her that existed before she decided to be invisible. She held it up and looked at me. If you are going to war, she said, then I am not showing up in beige. I smiled. For the first time since walking through our front door 2 days ago, I smiled. At 2:45, we sat in Helen's conference room. The trap was laid. The documents were stacked. The stage was set. And in 15 minutes, 4 people who thought they were coming to collect a prize would walk through that door and hand us everything we needed to end them. I adjusted my old khaki jacket over the suit. The disguise. The final layer of the performance. When they saw me, they would see the broken old man from the phone call. They would not see what was underneath until it was far, far too late. At 3 o'clock precisely, the glass doors of the conference room swung open. They entered like royalty arriving at court. Sophia first, always first. In a white silk blouse and cream trousers, her posture radiating the confidence of a woman who believed she had already won. Behind her came Brandon in his best navy suit, the one from his wedding photos. He had polished his shoes. He had shaved carefully. This was his celebration day. Then the Harringtons. Douglas strode in wearing a tailored blazer, his silver hair swept back, scanning the room the way a buyer scans a property. Patricia followed in a cloud of perfume and gold jewelry, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a metronome. They did not look nervous. They did not look ashamed. They looked triumphant. Brandon spotted me hunched in my chair, the old khaki jacket draped over my shoulders, my hands folded on the table. A subordinate position. A position of surrender. Dad, he said, placing his hand on my shoulder. His touch felt proprietary. I am so glad you are doing this. You are going to feel so much better once it is done. I nodded slowly. Did not meet his eyes. Douglas claimed the chair at the head of the table, as though it were a throne. Nice office, he said, glancing around. Not bad for a small estate practice. Patricia sat beside him, giving me a thin, pitying smile. The kind you give a dog at the shelter. Sophia stood by the windows checking her phone. Can we move this along? I have a realtor meeting at 6. Helen Zhao entered carrying 4 identical document binders, thick, professionally bound in dark blue with gold lettering. She set them on the table and took her position standing at the podium end. Good afternoon, she said. Her voice was neutral, warm, professionally accommodating. Thank you all for coming. I understand this is a significant family decision. Douglas nodded. Of course. Happy to support Walter and Margaret through this transition. Helen opened the first binder. This is the family estate planning and care agreement. Let me summarize. The agreement states that Mr. and Mrs. Walter Chen agree to transfer the full deed and title of 742 Kirkham Street to Mr. and Mrs. Brandon Chen. In exchange, Brandon and Sophia agree to provide comprehensive lifetime care for the founders, including housing, medical oversight, and management of all major financial decisions. Sophia stepped toward the table. Absolutely. 100%. Where do I sign? Helen raised one hand. We must go through this properly. She turned to Douglas and Patricia. Since you were present during the family discussion and are here today as witnesses, we ask that you sign the attestation on page 47. Your signatures will verify that you can personally attest to the founder's current state of mind and capacity. Their state of mind, Patricia repeated, exchanging a knowing smirk with Douglas. By signing, Helen continued smoothly, you confirm that you have personally observed and agree that Walter and Margaret Chen are in a state requiring dedicated supervision and that this transfer reflects their current limitations. Douglas leaned forward, practically glowing. We are absolutely prepared to attest to that. We have been concerned about their capacity for some time. He looked at Patricia. Happy to attest. They clearly need guidance. Helen slid the 4 binders across the table. Then please, let us begin. Sophia did not read a single word. She flipped directly to the signature page and signed with a quick, triumphant flourish. Brandon hesitated one moment, his eyes flicking to mine. I kept my face empty. Tired, he looked away and signed. Douglas took his copy to page 47 and signed with heavy, deliberate strokes. Patricia barely glanced at her page. Finally, she said, some sense in this family. Helen turned to me and Maggie. If the founders would please add their signatures. Maggie's hand was steady. She signed in careful, precise handwriting. I took the pen and signed. Walter James Chen. Helen collected all 4 copies. She stacked them neatly and tapped them once against the table. Well, she said, that appears to be everything. Sophia was already standing, clapping her hands together. Perfect. Brandon, call the contractor. They can start Monday. She turned to me. Dad? Mom, do not worry about packing. We will help you get settled in the back unit this weekend. It is cozy. You will love it. Thank you for being here with me. Before we go any further, take a second and tell me in the comments where you are watching from today. Also, a quick note. Some details in this story are dramatized to better convey the lesson. Any resemblance to real names or situations is unintentional, but the meaning remains absolutely true. I let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 7. 10. I watched them bask. I watched Sophia pull out her phone to text the realtor. I watched Douglas pour himself another glass of water with the ease of a man in his own home. I watched Patricia adjust her necklace in the reflection of the glass wall. I watched Brandon exhale, his shoulders dropping, the tension finally releasing from his body. I let them have it, their victory, their certainty, their absolute, blind, magnificent arrogance, for exactly 10 seconds. Then I reached up and unbuttoned my old khaki jacket. I shrugged it off my shoulders and let it fall across the back of my chair. Beneath it was the charcoal Tom Ford 3-piece suit, Italian wool, silk tie, custom fitted, a suit that cost more than everything Douglas was wearing combined. I stood up. Slowly. I straightened my spine. I adjusted my cuffs. And when I spoke, my voice did not tremble. It did not waver. It did not break. Actually, I said, and the word cut through Sophia's happy chatter like a blade through silk. We are not quite finished yet. The room went still. Sophia's smile froze. Douglas's hand stopped mid-reach for his water glass. Patricia's compact mirror snapped shut. Brandon looked at me, and I watched the color begin its slow, terrible drain from his face. Because the man standing before them now was not the broken old fool they had come to collect from. He was someone else entirely, someone they had never seen, someone they were completely, catastrophically unprepared for. And he was just getting started. What do you mean, not finished? Sophia's voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the first hairline crack beneath it. We signed everything. It is done. It is done, I agreed. But not in the way you think. I looked at Helen. She stepped forward, and her demeanor shifted. The warm, accommodating estate planner vanished. In her place stood something sharper, something with teeth. There is a small technical problem with the document you all just signed, Helen said. Douglas let out an impatient sigh. What problem? It is a standard transfer agreement. I reviewed property documents for 30 years, Patterson. I know how these things work. Helen's last name was Zhao, not Patterson. He did not even know her name. He had not bothered to learn it. That told me everything about how carefully he had read the agreement. The problem, Helen said, her voice dropping half a register, is that Walter Chen does not own the property at 742 Kirkham Street. The room crackled. Brandon's head snapped toward me. What? What are you talking about? I designed that house, I said. I built it with my own hands. I have lived in it for 30 years. But I have never owned it personally. Not for a single day in the last 25 years. Douglas stood up slowly. His country club smile was gone. Explain, he said. The property, Helen continued, along with all of Walter Chen's significant assets, is held by the Chen Family Trust. An irrevocable trust established in 2001. Walter is listed on the deeds solely as the trust's property manager. He cannot transfer it. He cannot sell it. He cannot give it away, because it was never his to give. Sophia's face cycled through confusion, then denial. But the county records, she stammered. His name is on the deed. We checked. You checked the public records, Helen said. But you did not, and could not, access the trust records. His name appears as manager, not owner. I watched Douglas process this. His legal mind, whatever was left of it, was grasping for handholds. So the transfer is void, he said slowly. Fine. It is void. We will simply leave and pursue other avenues. Oh, you will not be leaving just yet, Mr. Harrington, Helen said. And now came the second blow. The one I had waited 25 years to deliver. The Chen Family Trust, I said, stepping forward, is not a small retirement account. It is not a modest savings fund. I turned to face my son directly. When I sold my seismic design patents in 2001, I received $18 million. I invested it. I grew it. As of this morning, the trust is valued at $31 million. Silence. Absolute crystalline silence. Brandon stared at me. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Patricia's hand flew to her chest. Douglas went very still, the way a predator goes still when it realizes it has walked into a larger predator's territory. But the reaction I will never forget was Sophia's. Her face went through a rapid cascade. Confusion. Disbelief. And then, like the sun breaking through storm clouds, a wild, radiant, all-consuming joy. 31 million, she breathed. She turned to Brandon, grabbing his arm. Brandon, baby, we are rich. Oh my God, we are rich. She actually laughed, a high, bright, hysterical sound. Who cares about the house? Who needs the house? We get the trust. We get $31 million. She spun toward me, her entire demeanor transforming in an instant. The contempt evaporated. In its place was a desperate, grasping adoration. Dad. Oh, Dad. I always knew you were special. I always told Brandon, your father is such a dignified man. Stop, I said. One word. Quiet. Final. She froze mid-sentence. Her smile hung on her face like a broken window shade. You are not rich, I said. He is not rich. None of you are getting anything. Not the house. Not the trust. Not a single penny. What? Her voice was a whisper now. But Brandon is your son. He is the beneficiary. He was the beneficiary, I said. Helen stepped forward. She picked up the stack of documents they had all so eagerly signed. 23 years ago, she said, when Walter established this trust, he included a protective clause. We call it the Cornerstone Clause. It states that if any primary beneficiary, in this case Brandon Chen, is found to have engaged in willful, financial, emotional, or physical harm against the founders, that beneficiary is immediately and permanently disinherited, irrevocably, as if he had never been named. The word permanently hung in the air like a held breath. Brandon finally found his voice. When? He whispered. When did I trigger it? I looked at him. My son, my blood. 2 months ago, I said. August 14th, Pacific National Bank. You walked in with your father-in-law and a lawyer. You petitioned the trust's managing bank to have me declared mentally incompetent. You told them my simple lifestyle was evidence of cognitive decline. You asked for emergency signatory power over $31 million. Brandon's face went slack. How, he stammered. They said it was confidential. The bank called me within the hour, Helen said. As trust administrator, I am legally obligated to investigate any hostile action against the founders. Your conservatorship filing was an act of profound financial and emotional harm. It triggered the cornerstone clause, automatically. And tonight, I added, gesturing to the documents in Helen's hands, you signed a notarized confession. All four of you just put your names on a document stating that you believe I am mentally incompetent and that you are assuming control of my assets. You gave us everything we need for a court of law. Douglas was gray now. The color had drained from his face like water from a cracked vessel. Patricia gripped the edge of the table. Sophia stood frozen, her phone hanging limply in her hand, the realtor's number still glowing on the screen. Brandon looked at the documents, then at me, then at Helen. His eyes were wild, searching, desperate. If not me, he said, his voice cracking. Then who? Who gets it? It does not just disappear. I did not answer. I simply turned my head toward the side door of the conference room and nodded. Helen, I said, please ask our other guest to join us. The side door opened. A young woman walked in. She was about 30 years old. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a navy blue blazer over a white blouse. No jewelry except for a thin silver watch. No makeup except a trace of lip color. She carried a single manila envelope in her left hand. She looked like exactly what she was. A young professional. Competent. Calm. Unremarkable. But to me, she was remarkable. She was the most remarkable person in the room. Lily Tran, my mentee of 10 years. The girl who had walked into my architecture studio as a 20-year-old community college student with holes in her shoes and a portfolio full of genius. The woman I had put through school. The woman who called Maggie every Sunday without fail. The woman who had flown in from Portland overnight because I asked her to. Brandon's head snapped toward her. His confusion was immediate. Who the hell is she? This is a private family meeting. Sophia, still processing the loss of $31 million, looked at Lily with undisguised contempt. Is this your secretary? Get her out. Lily stopped 3 feet from the table. She looked at Brandon, not with anger, not with triumph, with a quiet, steady compassion that made his contempt seem very small. Hello, Brandon, she said. I am here because Uncle Walter and Aunt Maggie asked me to be. Uncle, Brandon repeated. The word seemed to physically confuse him. Helen spoke. Miss Tran is here as the contingent beneficiary of the Chen Family Trust. The what? As of 9 o'clock this morning, Helen continued, upon Brandon Chen's permanent disqualification under the Cornerstone Clause, the status of primary beneficiary was dissolved. Per the Trust's governing documents, all assets, rights, and titles transfer immediately to the contingent beneficiary. In this case, Miss Lily Tran. Helen looked at Lily and nodded. As of 9 this morning, Lily said, her voice calm and clear, I am the sole heir to the entire Chen Family Trust, including the property at 742 Kirkham Street. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever heard. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of an entire worldview, collapsing. The silence of 4 people realizing simultaneously that everything they had built their plan upon was not just wrong, but had never existed. Sophia broke first. Her face twisted. She spun toward Brandon. You idiot, she hissed. Her voice was low, venomous, barely human. You absolute idiot. You told me he was just a retired architect. You told me there was nothing else. You said the house was all there was. $31 million. $31 million. And you lost it because you could not even steal from an old man properly. Brandon did not respond. He was staring at Lily as though she were a hallucination. He could not comprehend it. His father's fortune, his inheritance, his future. handed to a stranger. A woman he had met maybe twice at family gatherings. A woman he had never considered worth remembering. Lily stepped forward and placed the manila envelope on the table directly in front of Brandon. It landed with a soft, final sound. "What is that?" he whispered. "As the new administrator of the trust," Lily said, "and legal manager of 742 Kirkham Street, this is a formal notice of eviction. You and your wife have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings from the property." Sophia lunged forward. "Eviction? You cannot evict us. That is our house. We were going to live there. We had plans, contractors." "It was never your house," Lily said, meeting Sophia's fury without flinching. "It belongs to the trust, which I now manage on behalf of my aunt and uncle. You have 48 hours. Anything left after that will be donated." Sophia was shaking, physically trembling with a rage so intense it seemed to distort her features. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Helen raised her hand. "We are not finished," Helen said. Her voice had changed again. Colder now. Harder. "Mr. Harrington, please sit back down. What comes next concerns you directly." Douglas, who had been inching toward the door, froze. He turned slowly. His face was the color of wet cement. "What else could there possibly be?" he said. His voice had lost its polish. It sounded thin, reedy, afraid. Helen clicked the remote. The wall monitors flickered to life. A new document filled the center screen. The header read in bold red type: Pacific Ledger, Digital Asset Fund, Corporate Filing, and Transaction History. Brandon, who had been staring at the eviction notice, looked up at the screen, his brow furrowed. "Why?" he said slowly. "Why is that up there? That is the fund I invested in. The one that collapsed. What does that have to do with?" He stopped. His eyes moved from the screen to the corporate filing details. Founding director and majority stakeholder. And there, in black type, was the name: Douglas Allen Harrington. Brandon turned to look at his father-in-law, the man who had welcomed him into the family, the man who had poured him scotch and taken him golfing and told him he was like a son, the man who had introduced him to Pacific Ledger and told him it was a sure thing, a family investment, guaranteed returns. "You," Brandon whispered. His voice was barely audible. "You did this to me?" Douglas did not answer. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping beneath the skin. Helen clicked again. Bank records filled the screen. Wire transfers highlighted in yellow. Pacific Ledger received approximately $11 million in total investor deposits over a 14-month period, she said. 3 days before the fund's publicized collapse, $2.1 million was transferred from the fund's primary account to an offshore entity in the Cayman Islands. An entity controlled exclusively by Douglas Harrington. Brandon was shaking his head. Small, tight movements, back and forth, like a metronome winding down. "No," he said. "No. You told me it was the market. You said crypto was volatile. You said everyone lost." "Not everyone," Helen said. "Your father-in-law withdrew his investment plus profit 72 hours before the collapse." A collapse, our forensic team has confirmed, that was deliberately engineered through coordinated sell-offs from accounts Douglas controlled. Brandon looked at Douglas, really looked at him, and I watched something happen in my son's face that I had never seen before. Not shame, not fear, recognition. The sudden, devastating recognition that the man he had trusted, the man he had tried so hard to impress, had been feeding on him from the very beginning. "You took my $900,000, Brandon said. His voice was low, trembling, not with weakness, with a fury that was just now finding its shape. "You took everything I had. You destroyed my life. And then you came to my parents' house and tried to steal from them too. To cover what you stole from me." Douglas opened his mouth. "Brandon, listen. The market is—" "Shut up," Brandon said. The words came out flat. Dead, final. "Just shut up." He turned to me. His eyes were wet, burning. "Dad," he said, I did not know. I swear to God, I did not know it was him. I looked at my son, and for the first time since I had found Maggie crying in her reading room, I felt something other than rage. I felt something complicated, something that hurt. I know, I said, but knowing did not change what was coming. And what was coming was aimed directly at Douglas Harrington. Helen clicked the remote again. The Pacific Ledger data vanished from the monitors. In its place appeared a new header, one that made Douglas's face go from gray to white. IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Case file. Harrington, Douglas A. What is this? Patricia whispered. Her voice was barely audible. This, Helen said, is the result of a 10-month federal investigation into your husband's financial activities. She addressed Patricia directly now, with a clinical detachment that was almost merciful in its precision. Mr. Harrington has been under active investigation by the IRS Criminal Division since January of this year. Douglas stood up. His chair scraped backward against the floor. This is outrageous. You have no right to access federal investigation files. This is privileged. This is. I did not access them, Mr. Harrington, Helen said calmly. My forensic team uncovered the same evidence independently while investigating the Pacific Ledger fraud. The IRS was kind enough to confirm that our findings aligned with theirs. They were, in fact, grateful for the additional documentation. She clicked again. Spreadsheets, bank records, wire transfers to entities in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Singapore, dates going back a decade, 10 years of systematic tax evasion, Helen continued. Unreported offshore accounts totaling $4.7 million. Fraudulent deductions. Shell companies used to hide income. And now, with Pacific Ledger added to the file, we can add wire fraud, securities fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse. Douglas was gripping the edge of the table. His knuckles were bone white. You cannot prove any of this, he said. But his voice had lost its authority. It was thin, desperate. The bank records prove it, Helen said. The wire transfers prove it. Your own signature on the Pacific Ledger corporate filings proves it. And the document you signed 20 minutes ago, attesting to Walter's mental incompetence as part of a scheme to seize his assets, proves your intent to commit elder fraud. Patricia turned to her husband. Her face was a mask of dawning horror. Douglas, she said, tell me, this is not true. Tell me. He did not answer her. He did not look at her. Sophia had been quiet, unnaturally quiet. She stood by the window, her arms crossed, her phone forgotten in her hand. She was watching her father with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was not anger. It was calculation. The same cold, rapid calculation she applied to everything. She was determining her position, assessing the damage, deciding which side of this wreckage to stand on. Dad, she said. Her voice was flat. Did you know the fund was going to collapse when you told Brandon to invest? Douglas finally looked at his daughter, and in that look, in the 3 seconds of silence before he answered, everyone in the room saw the truth. Sophia, he began, the market is unpredictable. I never intended. You knew, Sophia said. It was not a question. You took Brandon's money. You took everyone's money. And then you came to this family and tried to take more. You used me. She stepped back from him as though he were contaminated. You used me to connect Brandon to your fund. I brought him in because you told me it was safe. You made me part of this. Patricia let out a low moan. She was clutching the table edge, swaying slightly. Douglas, she whispered. The house. You told me to sell the house. You told me it was a market opportunity. You said we were diversifying. You sold the Pacific Heights house to cover his tracks, Helen said to Patricia. Not unkindly. Along with the Tahoe property. 3 vehicles. Your domestic assets have been systematically liquidated over the past 6 months. In preparation, I suspect, for the federal seizure your husband knew was coming. Patricia's eyes rolled back. Her grip on the table released, and she crumpled sideways. Douglas caught her, barely, lowering her into a chair. She was not unconscious, but she was gone, checked out, her mind refusing to process any more of this. Sophia watched her mother collapse and felt nothing visible. She turned to Brandon instead. Her face was hard, empty. The mask of love, of partnership, of family, had fallen away completely. There was nothing beneath it except angles and arithmetic. "I want a divorce," she said. The words were directed at Brandon but aimed at the room, effective immediately. She pulled the diamond ring from her finger. The ring Brandon had bought with money he did not have. Money he had borrowed. Money that was now part of his $900,000 debt. She held it up between her thumb and forefinger, examining it with disgust. "This is probably cubic zirconia anyway," she said, and she threw it. Not at Brandon. At the wall. It hit the glass with a sharp crack and fell to the carpet. She turned to her father. "I am leaving. I am calling my own lawyer, not yours. And if anyone from this family contacts me again, I will cooperate fully with the IRS as a witness." She picked up her purse, walked to the door, and pulled it open. She paused and looked back at Brandon one last time. "You were supposed to be my way out," she said. Her voice was quiet now, almost sad. "But you turned out to be just another dead end." The door closed behind her. Douglas was still standing over Patricia, his hand on her shoulder, but his eyes were fixed on the door his daughter had just walked through. For the first time, he looked old. Not just old. Destroyed. "I need to leave," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I need to take my wife and leave." Helen shook her head. "I would advise against that, Mr. Harrington. There are 2 IRS criminal investigation agents currently waiting in the building lobby. They have been there since 2:45 this afternoon. They have questions for you regarding your offshore holdings, and I suspect they will have additional questions now regarding Pacific Ledger." Douglas sat down. He did not choose to. His legs simply gave out beneath him, and he dropped into the nearest chair like a building whose foundation had just been pulled away. The room was quiet now. Patricia slumped in her chair, eyes glazed. Douglas staring at nothing, his silver hair falling across his forehead, his blazer rumpled, his entire persona crumbling like wet paper. The chair at the head of the table, the one he had claimed so confidently an hour ago, now looked like a witness stand. And Brandon. My son stood in the center of the room, alone. His wife had walked out. His father-in-law was about to be arrested. His mother-in-law was catatonic. He had lost $31 million, his house, and his marriage in the span of 40 minutes. He turned to me. Slowly. His face was a ruin. Tear-streaked, flushed, hollowed out. Every mask gone. Every pretense shattered. "Dad," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Am I going to prison too?" The question hung in the air. "Am I going to prison too?" 6 words spoken by a 37-year-old man who sounded, in that moment, exactly like the 5-year-old boy who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. Helen looked at me. I gave her the smallest nod. She turned to Brandon. "That depends entirely on what happens in the next 10 minutes, Mr. Chen," she said. She pulled a yellow legal pad from her briefcase and clicked her pen. "But let me be clear about your current legal exposure." Brandon flinched. He was still standing in the center of the room, alone. His navy suit looked ridiculous now, like a costume from a play that had been canceled mid-performance. "First," Helen said, writing as she spoke, "conspiracy to commit felony elder fraud. You, your wife, and your in-laws conspired to deprive your parents of their legal property by fabricating claims of mental incompetence." She held up the signed documents, a charge to which you have just confessed in writing with witnesses. Brandon's hands began to shake, a visible tremor that started in his fingers and spread up his arms. "No," he said. "We did not, we just thought." "Second," Helen continued, "attempted conservatorship fraud. 2 months ago, you and Douglas Harrington petitioned Pacific National Bank to seize control of your father's trust assets, using fabricated evidence of mental decline. The bank's security footage is excellent. The trust manager's testimony is already on file. I was worried about him, Brandon said. The words came out thin, rehearsed. The last remnant of a script someone else had written for him. Third, Helen went on. Accomplice to wire fraud. You signed paperwork, facilitating Douglas Harrington's access to trust inquiry channels at the bank. Whether you knew the full extent of his scheme is irrelevant. Your signature is on the documents. Brandon's legs buckled. He did not sit so much as collapse into the nearest chair. His elbows hit the table, and his head dropped into his hands. And fourth, Helen said, her voice dropping to something almost gentle in its finality. Elder abuse. You intentionally inflicted emotional distress on your parents, both over the age of 65, for the explicit purpose of financial gain. In this state, Mr. Chen, that carries a mandatory minimum prison sentence. Prison. The word landed like a physical weight on his shoulders. I watched him absorb it. Watched the reality of it settle into his bones. How long? He whispered into his hands. For elder abuse alone, Helen said, 3 to 5 years. Combined with the fraud charges, we are looking at 8 to 12. Brandon let out a sound, not a word. A sound. Raw, animal, broken. He pushed himself up from the table and stumbled toward me. His knees hit the floor, and he grabbed the fabric of my suit jacket, his fingers twisting into the Italian wool like a drowning man grabbing rope. Dad, he choked. Dad, please. You would not. You cannot send your son to prison. It was Sophia. It was Douglas. They told me it was normal. They said every family does estate planning like this. I was desperate. I did not know what else to do. I love you, Dad. I have always loved you. Please, please do not do this. I looked down at him, my son, on his knees, begging, and I felt something vast and terrible open up inside my chest. Not anger, not satisfaction, grief, pure, bottomless grief for the man he could have been and the man he had chosen to become instead. You love me, I said. The words tasted like ash. You tried to have me declared insane. You measured my walls while your mother cried 20 feet away. You called my home an underutilized asset. You told me it was time. Is that what love looks like to you, Brandon? I did not, he sobbed. I was scared. I was drowning. You were ashamed, I said. He went still. His grip on my jacket loosened. He looked up at me, and I saw it. The truth, not the rehearsed excuse, not the blame deflection, the actual, naked, pathetic truth. Yes, he whispered. His voice cracked open like an egg. I was ashamed. Tell me, I said. And he did. The words came pouring out of him like water from a broken pipe. Sophia's family, the Harringtons, their world, the country clubs, and the charity galas, and the summers in Napa. The way they talked about money like oxygen, like something you either had or you died without. The way Patricia looked at our house when she first visited and said, "Oh, how quaint." The way Douglas shook my hand at the wedding and said, "So you are the architect?" As though I had said I cleaned gutters for a living. I wanted to be enough, Brandon said, his face twisted with a shame so profound it seemed to age him 10 years in front of me. Sophia expected a certain life. Her parents expected it, and I could not provide it. I could not even come close. So I lied. I told them you were old money, eccentric, that you lived simply by choice but had millions hidden away. He laughed. A terrible, hollow sound. Turns out I was not even lying, he said. You actually did have millions. You just never told me. So you invested in Douglas's fund, I said. He said it was guaranteed, Brandon whispered. Family money, Sophia pushed it. Douglas walked me through the projections himself. 900,000. Everything we had. Everything I could borrow. I thought one big win would fix it all. Make the lie real. But it was not guaranteed. No, it was a theft. And I did not know until tonight. He looked at me, his eyes streaming. So when the money was gone, and the debts closed in, and Sophia started talking about the house, about your house, about how it was the only asset left, I went along with it. I told myself it would be temporary, that you would understand, that you would forgive me. His voice broke completely. I just wanted to stop being poor, Dad. I just wanted to stop pretending. The room was silent. Helen had stopped writing. Lily stood by the window, her back turned, giving us privacy. Douglas was slumped in his chair, forgotten. Patricia had not moved. And then Maggie stood up. She had been sitting so still, so quiet, that I had almost forgotten she was there. But she was there. She had heard every word, every excuse, every confession, every pathetic, heartbreaking syllable. She walked across the room. Her heels clicked against the floor. She stopped directly in front of Brandon, who was still on his knees, looking up at her with the face of a child who knows what is coming. She raised her right hand. The sound of her palm connecting with his cheek echoed off the glass walls like a gunshot. It was not gentle. It snapped his head sideways and left an immediate red mark blooming across his skin. That, she said, her voice shaking with a fury I had never heard from her in 43 years of marriage, is for making me cry in my reading room. That is for touching my books. That is for calling our home a teardown. That is for measuring my walls like I was already dead. Brandon did not flinch. He did not raise his hand to his cheek. He just knelt there, his head bowed, accepting it. Accepting everything. And then Maggie did something I did not expect. She let out a great, shuddering sob. Her rigid posture broke. Her shoulders collapsed inward, and she dropped to her knees on the polished floor in front of our son. She pulled his head to her chest, wrapped her arms around him, and held him the way she had held him when he was small, when he was frightened, when the world was too big and she was the only safe place. And this, she cried, her tears falling into his hair, this is because you are still my son. You are a fool. A terrible, terrible fool. But you are still my son, and I am still your mother. And nothing you have done changes that. Brandon shattered. Whatever wall he had left, whatever thin membrane of composure was holding him together, it dissolved. He buried his face in his mother's shoulder, and he howled. Not cried. Howled. The sound of a man who has just touched the absolute bottom of his life and found his mother waiting there. They knelt together on the floor of that expensive conference room. Two people holding on to each other in the wreckage of everything their family used to be. Maggie rocked him gently, the way she used to when he was 3 years old and could not sleep. Her eyes were closed. Her face was streaming with tears, but her arms were iron. I let them have 1 full minute. I counted it in my head. 60 seconds of grief. 60 seconds of a mother's love fighting against the weight of a son's betrayal. Then I stepped forward. Diane. I caught myself. Maggie, that is enough. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red, swollen, but clear. She understood. She kissed the top of Brandon's head once, gently, and then she stood. She smoothed her red dress. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She walked back to her chair and sat down. Brandon stayed on the floor. He did not have the strength to get up. I turned to Helen. Helen, Lily, would you please give us the room? And she nodded toward the far end where Douglas was still slumped, Patricia still glazed beside him. Take them as well. Helen moved efficiently. She spoke quietly to Douglas, who rose like a man walking to his own execution. Patricia was guided to her feet by Lily's gentle hand. They shuffled out through the side door. Douglas did not look at me. He did not look at Brandon. He looked at nothing. The door closed. The room was silent. Just the 3 of us now. Father, mother, son. Get up, Brandon, I said. He did not move. I said, get up. Slowly, painfully. He pushed himself off the floor. He stood before me, swaying slightly. His suit was rumpled, his face a ruin of tears and shame. He looked like what he was. A broken man. A man who had lost everything. A man who had nothing left except the 2 people standing in front of him. You have two paths, I said. My voice was calm, measured. The voice I used to use in construction meetings when a building was off spec and someone had to be told. Listen carefully, because I will only say this once. He nodded. His eyes never left my face. Path A. Helen walks that file to the district attorney tomorrow morning. You, Sophia, Douglas, Patricia, all of you face criminal charges. Elder fraud, conservatorship fraud, conspiracy. The evidence is airtight. You signed the confession yourself. 8 to 12 years, Brandon. That is Path A. His face went white. Dad, please. Path B, I continued, cutting him off. You avoid prison. You avoid criminal charges. But you pay for what you did, not in years behind bars, in something harder, something that will actually change you. And these conditions are absolute, non-negotiable. You agree to all of them right now, in this room, or I call Helen back in. Anything, he whispered. Tell me. I began to pace. Slowly. The way I used to pace a construction site, inspecting every joint, every angle. First, I said, you will check into a 30-day inpatient financial recovery program. You have an addiction, Brandon. Not to gambling exactly, to the fantasy of easy money, to shortcuts, to the belief that one big win will fix everything. That ends. 30 days. Then outpatient counseling for as long as the therapist says. Yes, he said immediately. Yes, I will do it. Second, you will find a job. Not a marketing job. Not an office job. You will work with your hands. Construction. Hardware. Landscaping. I do not care what. You will earn a paycheck through physical labor. And every dollar you earn above what you need to survive will go toward paying back the $900,000 you owe. Not to me. To the trust. At whatever pace you can manage. If it takes you the rest of your life, so be it. He swallowed. His soft, uncalloused hands clenched at his sides. But he nodded. Third, Sophia Harrington and her entire family. You are done with them. Helen is drafting divorce papers as we speak. You will sign them. You will agree to a permanent restraining order against all three Harringtons. You will never see, speak to, or contact any of them again. They are poison, Brandon. They poisoned you, and you let them. That one is already done, he said quietly. I saw her walk away from a bad investment, I said. That is not the same as you choosing to be free of her. You will sign the papers. You will make it legal. You will close that door forever. Yes, done. I stopped pacing. I stood directly in front of him, close enough to see the individual tear tracks on his cheeks, close enough to see the red mark from his mother's hand still glowing on his skin. And fourth, I said, you will come home. His face changed. A flash of desperate hope broke through the wreckage. Home, he breathed. Dad, thank you. Do not thank me. I cut him off. You are not coming home as our son. You are coming home as our tenant. Lily is the new owner of the property. She will be your landlord. He blinked, confused. You will live in the in-law unit, I said. The one in the backyard. The one you and Sophia so generously selected for me and your mother. The one you called cozy. The one you said we would love. I watched the irony register on his face like a slow-moving wave. You will live there, I continued. And in exchange for rent, you will be the property's handyman. You will fix the roof. You will unclog the drains. You will paint the fences. You will repair every crack, every leak, every broken thing in that house. You will learn with your own hands what it takes to maintain the home you were so ready to sell. I paused. And you will start with the bookshelf in your mother's reading room, the one someone knocked crooked while they were measuring walls. You will fix it. You will put her books back in the order she likes, and you will never touch them again without her permission. Brandon stood there, the full weight of it settling onto him like concrete. He had gone from heir to a $31 million fortune to a broke, divorced handyman, sentenced to live in his parents' backyard unit and fix their plumbing. He looked at his mother, She met his gaze, steady, unblinking. He looked at me. "Yes, Dad," he whispered. "I accept." The phone rang 2 weeks later. I was sitting on the back porch of 742 Kirkham Street, watching the fog roll in from the ocean the way it always did in the late afternoon. The house was quiet. Maggie was inside reading, her armchair pulled close to the window where the last of the daylight came through. Everything was still. Waiting. Helen's voice on the line was crisp, efficient, the voice of a woman closing a file. "Walter," she said, "I wanted to give you the final update on the Harrington situation. It is officially over." "Tell me," I said. "Douglas Harrington was arrested yesterday morning," Helen began. "Federal agents, securities fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse. My sources say the IRS has been building this case for nearly a year, but our evidence from the Pacific Ledger scheme accelerated their timeline significantly. He is looking at 18 years minimum. No possibility of early release, given the elder abuse enhancement." I closed my eyes. I thought of the man who had stood in my living room 2 weeks ago, photographing my shelving, drinking my water, calling my home an underutilized asset. 18 years in a federal cell. A long time to think about value. "Patricia," Helen continued, "is effectively destitute. Every domestic asset was already liquidated to cover Douglas's tracks. The house in Pacific Heights, the Tahoe property, gone. The federal government has now frozen what remains. She is living with her sister in Sacramento. My investigator reports she has not left the house in 6 days. I felt nothing. No sympathy, no satisfaction, just the flat recognition of consequence. "And Sophia?" I asked. Helen paused. A slight sound that might have been amusement. "Miss Harrington filed for divorce from Brandon 3 days ago. Her attorney, a rather expensive one from a downtown firm, submitted a motion for emergency alimony and asset seizure." "What happened?" "We responded with Brandon's current financial disclosure. His pay stubs from the hardware store. His lease agreement for the in-law unit. His bank balance of $87. Helen's voice carried a dry satisfaction. "Her attorney withdrew from the case yesterday morning. Cited non-payment of services. It seems Miss Harrington cannot afford her own lawyer. So she gets nothing. She gets exactly what she contributed to this family," Helen said. "Ambition without substance." My investigator did one final follow-up, purely out of professional curiosity. She was photographed last weekend at a tech industry gala in Palo Alto, on the arm of a 75-year-old venture capitalist. "Some people never learn," I said. "No," Helen agreed. "They just find new prey. But that is no longer our concern. The Harringtons are finished. All that remains is Brandon." "Yes," I said. "All that remains is Brandon." He had come home from the 30-day inpatient program 4 days ago. I had watched from the kitchen window as a taxi dropped him off at the curb. He was thinner. His face was drawn, stripped of the false confidence that had defined him for years. He carried a single duffel bag. He did not come to the front door. He walked around the side of the house, down the narrow path between the jasmine bushes, and let himself into the in-law unit with the key Lily had left under the mat. He had kept his word. The next morning, he started at the hardware store 6 blocks away, building materials, paint mixing, loading bags of concrete into trucks. He left at 7 in the morning and came back at 6:15 in the evening. Every day, without variation. I knew this because I watched, not deliberately. But the kitchen window faced the side path, and every evening at 6:15, I would see him pass. Head down, shoulders slumped, his clothes covered in a fine layer of dust, his hands stained with things that would not wash off easily. He looked exhausted. He looked diminished. But he also looked, for the first time in years, real. He did not speak to me. I did not speak to him. We existed in the same property, separated by 30 feet of yard and an ocean of unspoken things. He ate his meals alone in the unit. He did his laundry on Tuesdays when he knew I would be at my morning walk. He was a ghost in his own childhood home. Lily and Kevin had moved in 10 days ago. They took the 2 guest rooms on the second floor. Kevin, her husband, was a high school math teacher with a quiet smile and a way of making everyone around him feel at ease. Lily was 4 months pregnant. The moment Maggie found out, something ignited in her. A purpose, a direction for all the love and energy that had been bleeding out of her with nowhere to go. The house was alive again. Not the way it had been before. Not the tense, silent endurance of the last few years, when Brandon's visits felt like inspections and his phone calls felt like obligations. This was different. This was the sound of Maggie laughing in the kitchen while she taught Lily her dumpling recipe. The smell of Kevin's coffee brewing at 6 in the morning. The sound of someone singing softly upstairs. It was a family. A different one than I had planned, but a real one. And then there was Brandon, orbiting the edges, watching from a distance, paying his debt in silence. Until this evening. I was still on the back porch, the phone call with Helen finished, the fog now thick enough to taste. I heard the side gate open and close, 6:15, right on schedule. But instead of passing straight through to the in-law unit, the footsteps stopped. I heard a quiet knock on the wooden frame of the porch. I turned. Brandon stood at the edge of the patio. He was covered in sawdust. His hair was matted with sweat. His fingernails were rimmed with something dark. He looked like a man who had spent the day building things instead of buying them. "Dad," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Careful. The fence in the backyard. The one along the garden. Mom's garden. I noticed it is leaning pretty badly. Has been for a while, I think." I looked at him. 3 years, I said. "It has been leaning for 3 years. He nodded. "Can I fix it this weekend? I can get the materials from the store. Cedar posts. I know how to set them now. They taught me." I let 5 seconds of silence pass. The fog curled between us. "The tools are in the garage," I said. "Third shelf." He nodded. A small, quick movement. "Thank you." He turned to go. "Dad?" I waited. "I am sorry. I know that does not fix anything, but I am sorry." I did not answer. I just gave a single nod. Small. Almost invisible in the fog. But enough. He walked away. I heard the in-law unit door open and close. And I sat there in the gathering dark, listening to the fog move through the garden, feeling something I could not quite name, something fragile and uncertain, something that might, if handled very carefully, one day become forgiveness. 6 months. That is how long it takes for a house to become a home again. Not through grand gestures, not through declarations or apologies, or legal documents, through small things. Through the daily accumulation of ordinary moments stacked one upon another like bricks. Spring had come to Kirkham Street. Maggie's garden, which had been neglected for years while she was too tired and too sad to tend it, was alive again. Camellias, blooming pink along the fence. The fence Brandon had rebuilt in January. Cedar posts, properly set, level and true. He had done it over 2 weekends, working alone in the cold rain, not asking for help, not complaining, just working. The jasmine along the side path was coming back too. Kevin had pruned it properly in February, and now it was sending out new shoots, climbing the trellis with the kind of stubborn optimism that plants have. The whole south side of the house smelled like jasmine in the evenings. Like it used to. Like it was supposed to. Sunday dinner had become a tradition. It was Lily who started it. She had insisted, 3 months ago, over Maggie's initial hesitation. "He lives here, Aunt Maggie. He does the work. He should eat with the family, at least on Sundays." So every Sunday at 6 o'clock, the dining table was set for 5. The same table where Sophia had once spread her real estate portfolio. The same table where Patricia had left a water ring without a coaster. Now, it held Maggie's roasted chicken, Kevin's garlic bread, Lily's salad from the backyard garden that Kevin had planted in March. Tonight was no different. The kitchen was warm and loud, with the particular chaos of people who are comfortable with each other. Lily, now 8 months pregnant, was stationed at the counter arranging a fruit tart she had been experimenting with. Her belly pressed against the countertop, and she kept shifting her weight from foot to foot, one hand on her lower back. "You need to sit down," Maggie said for the fourth time, hovering behind her with a glass of water. "I am fine, Aunt Maggie. The baby likes it when I stand." "She moves more." "She?" Kevin looked up from the bread he was slicing. "We agreed not to find out." "I have a feeling," Lily said, smiling. Maggie touched Lily's belly gently. "Whatever it is," she said, "it is going to be the most spoiled child in San Francisco." They laughed. The sound filled the kitchen and spilled out through the open window into the cool spring evening. I stood in the doorway watching them. My wife, my niece who had become a daughter, her husband who had become a son, a baby on the way, a family I had not planned for but had somehow found. Dinner was simple. Good food. Easy conversation. Kevin was telling a story about a student who had submitted a physics paper arguing that friction was a government conspiracy. Lily was countering with a story about a client who wanted her to design a house with no right angles because they had read that corners collected negative energy. Maggie laughed at both stories. A real laugh. Deep and full and completely unguarded. I had not heard that laugh in years. It was the sound of a woman who had stopped being afraid, who had stopped waiting for the next blow. And at the end of the table, quiet and attentive, was Brandon. He looked different now. Not just physically, though that was striking enough. His hands were the most obvious change. They were no longer the smooth, moisturized hands of a marketing executive. They were rough, the knuckles thick and calloused, the fingernails clean but permanently darkened at the edges from months of paint and stain and concrete dust. They were workers' hands. Honest hands. He ate slowly. He listened more than he spoke. When Kevin addressed him directly about a repair he had made to the attic insulation, Brandon answered without pride or performance. Just facts. "The old batting was compressed," he said, his eyes on his plate. "Probably original from when Dad built the place. I saw a draft coming in by the north-facing eave. Replace the whole section with new fiberglass. Should keep you about 10 degrees warmer up there." "Well, whatever you did," Lily said, smiling at him across the table. "It worked. Thank you, Brandon." He nodded. A slight flush rose on his neck. "You are welcome," he said, and went back to his chicken. He was not the center of attention. He was not performing. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was just there, present, earning his place at the table, one repaired pipe, one fixed shingle, one mowed lawn at a time. After dinner, Maggie and Lily began clearing plates while debating nursery colors. Kevin excused himself to grade papers. The kitchen emptied. The house settled into its evening quiet. I did what I always did. I went to the front porch. The evening was cool. Clear for once, the fog holding off. I could see stars above the rooftops, something rare in the city. I sat in the rocking chair that had belonged to my father. The chair he had built himself from walnut 50 years ago. I had refinished it last summer. Sanded down the wear marks. Resealed the joints. Some things are worth maintaining. The screen door opened and closed behind me. Footsteps on the porch boards. Not Maggie's light step. Not Kevin's even stride. Brandon's work boots. Heavy, deliberate. He stopped a few feet away. I did not turn. I just kept rocking, looking out at the quiet street. "Dad," he said. "Brandon, can I talk to you for a minute?" "I am listening." He took a breath. The kind of breath a man takes before he steps off a ledge. His rough hands were shaking slightly as he pulled them from the pockets of his clean jeans. In his right hand, he held 2 envelopes. Standard white business envelopes, slightly creased from being carried in his back pocket all evening. "This is the first one," he said, holding out the thicker envelope. His voice was quiet, careful, like a man handling something fragile. I took it. It had weight. I could feel the bills inside. "It is for Lily and Kevin," he said, not meeting my eyes. "For the baby. She is due in 5 weeks and they are going to need things. Diapers. A car seat. I do not know what else. But that is my entire paycheck from the store this month. $412. I want them to have it. I held the envelope. $400. From a man who made barely enough to feed himself. A man who ate ramen in his backyard unit and wore the same 3 shirts in rotation because he could not afford to buy new ones. All right, I said. I will give it to her. He nodded. Then slowly, he held out the second envelope. This one was thin, almost weightless. And this, he said. His voice dropped. His eyes finally met mine, and I saw something in them that I had not seen before. Not shame. Not the old, familiar shame of being poor, or being caught, or being inadequate. Something newer, something quieter. The shame of a debtor making his first honest payment on a debt he knows he can never fully repay. It is not much, he said. It is $150. It is all I could save this month after rent and food and the bus pass. But it is the first one. The first what? I asked, though I already knew. The first payment, he said, for the $900,000. I know it is nothing. I know it is a joke. I know it will take me forever, but I wanted to start. I needed to start. I held the thin envelope in my hands. $150 against a debt of $900,000. I did the math in my head. The same instinctive calculation I had done 10,000 times when computing load-bearing ratios and stress tolerances. You are right, I said. It is not much. At this rate, it will take you about 500 years. He flinched, but he did not look away. He did not make an excuse. He just stood there on my porch in his clean jeans and his worn boots, and he took the truth. I know, sir, he whispered. I looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then I slowly, deliberately, placed it in the breast pocket of my shirt, right over my heart. I patted it once. All right, I said, one down. A single tear escaped his eye. He wiped it away quickly with the back of his rough hand. An angry gesture, as though the tear had betrayed him. Thank you, he said. He stood there for another moment. The porch light cast long shadows across his face. He looked older than 37. He looked worn, but he also looked present in a way he never had before. Grounded, planted in the earth rather than floating above it. He turned to go. I listened to his boots on the porch boards. 1 step, 2, 3. Then they stopped. Dad? I waited. I fixed the bookshelf. I went very still. The rocking chair stopped moving. In Mom's reading room, he continued. His back was to me. His voice was rough. The one I knocked crooked when we were measuring. I fixed it last weekend. It is level now, perfectly level. I checked it 3 times with the spirit level from the store. He paused. I could hear him swallow, and I put her books back. All of them. In the order she likes. Alphabetical by author. Then by publication date, within each author. She showed me once. Years ago. I remembered. He was quiet for a moment. Then, very softly, I will never touch them again without her permission. I sat in my father's rocking chair. I did not speak. I could not. There was something in my throat that would not allow it. A pressure that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with something I was not ready to name. The bookshelf. The one in Maggie's reading room. The sanctuary where she had been crying when I came home that night. 6 months ago. A lifetime ago. The shelf I had built into the wall 30 years ago to hold the things she loved most. The shelf someone had knocked crooked while measuring our home for sale. While calculating the square footage of our lives. While reducing everything we had built to a listing price. It was level now. The books were back. In the right order. Something crooked had been made straight. Good night, Dad, Brandon said. Good night, son. His boots descended the porch steps. I heard the side gate open and close. The path through the jasmine. The in-law unit door soft in the dark. And then silence. Just the distant sound of the city. The cool spring air on my face. The faint murmur of Maggie and Lily still talking inside, their voices warm and unintelligible through the walls. The weight of the envelope against my chest. $150. A drop in an ocean of debt. But real. Honest. Earned. I reached up and touched the pocket. Felt the crinkle of paper. Felt the warmth of my own heartbeat beneath it. The bookshelf was level. The fence was straight. The roof did not leak. The garden was blooming. And somewhere in the backyard, in a small unit with a single bed and a hot plate, my son was learning what I had spent 25 years trying to teach him and failing. That a home is not an asset. It is not square footage. It is not a listing price or a market opportunity or an underutilized resource. A home is the thing you build, and then rebuild, and then repair, over and over, with your own hands, for the people you love, even when it takes 500 years. I sat in my reading chair that night, long after everyone had gone to bed. The house was quiet in the way. Only old houses can be quiet, not silent, but breathing. The refrigerator hummed its low note. A pipe somewhere in the west wall ticked as it cooled. The oak floors settled beneath 40 years of footsteps, mine and Maggie's, and now Lily's and Kevin's, and even Brandon's heavy, repentant ones padding from the back unit to the kitchen each morning before dawn. Maggie's bookshelf stood against the far wall, level for the first time in 3 years. Brandon had spent an entire Saturday on it. He had removed every book, sanded the warped bracket, replaced 2 screws with longer ones that bit deeper into the stud, and returned each volume to its precise location. Maggie's system was not alphabetical. It was emotional. The books she loved most lived at eye level. The ones that made her cry sat on the bottom shelf, where she had to kneel to reach them, a small act of devotion each time. Brandon had learned the order. He had paid attention. And that, I think, was the first real evidence that something inside him had shifted from its broken axis. I am not a forgiving man by nature. Architects do not forgive crooked walls. We tear them down and rebuild. But people are not walls. People are more like trees. They grow crooked toward whatever light they can find. And sometimes the light they reach for belongs to someone else. Brandon reached for Douglas Harrington's light because he believed his own father had none to offer. That was my fault. I built the trust in secret. I hid my success like a man hides a scar. I told myself it was protection, wisdom, a long game. But part of it was pride. I wanted to see if my son could build something without knowing his father already had. And when he couldn't, when he stumbled and grabbed the nearest hand, I judged him for it. I do not tell you this story so you will admire me. I am not the hero. The hero is the woman upstairs who forgave her son with a slap and an embrace in the same breath. The hero is the young woman down the hall, 8 months pregnant, who accepted an inheritance she never asked for and immediately set a place at the table for the man who lost it. The hero is the 37-year-old man in the back unit who wakes at 5 each morning, pulls on a green apron, and stocks shelves for $11 an hour because he gave his word. I am just the architect. I drew the blueprint. But a blueprint is only paper until someone picks up a hammer. If you are listening to this, and you have a family, and by family I mean anyone whose absence would leave a hole in your chest that no amount of money could fill, I want you to hear me clearly. Protect them, not just with locks on your doors or insurance policies or trusts with clever clauses. Protect them with truth. I waited 25 years to tell my wife what I had built. 25 years she carried worry I could have erased with a single conversation. That was not protection. That was cowardice dressed in a good suit. And if someone in your family has betrayed you, if they have measured your walls while your wife wept, if they have tried to declare you less than what you are, you have every right to your anger. Hold it. Use it. Build something with it. But do not let it be the last thing you build. Anger makes excellent foundations. Terrible roofs. You will need something softer for the roof patience maybe. Or a Sunday dinner with 5 plates instead of 2. The house at 742 Kirkham Street is quiet tonight. Maggie is sleeping with her hand on my side of the bed even though I am not there yet. Lily's baby will arrive in 4 weeks. And Kevin has already assembled the crib twice because the first time he followed the instructions, and the second time he followed common sense. Brandon's light is off in the back unit, but I know he is awake because I can see the faint glow of his phone. He is reading. He told me last week he started a book about financial literacy. Chapter 1. $150. That is what he paid tonight toward $912,000. It will take him a lifetime. Maybe longer. But he handed it to me with both hands, the way you hand someone something that matters, and he looked me in the eye for the first time in 6 months without flinching. I think that is what redemption looks like. Not a single grand gesture. Not a courtroom, or a confession, or a clause in a legal document. Just a man handing another man $150 and saying, without words, I am still here. I am still trying. The bookshelf is level. The fence is straight. The garden is blooming. And tomorrow morning, I will wake up, walk to my wife's reading room, and sit in the chair by the window where the light comes in at exactly the right angle, the way only an architect would notice, and I will read. Because that is what home is. It is not a building. It is not a deed or a trust or $31 million. It is the feeling of sitting in a room where every shelf is level, every book is in its place, and the people you love are breathing softly somewhere nearby. That is the last blueprint I will ever draw. And it is my best work.